Hi there, it's Watchin, founder and CEO of I Choose the Ladder, and I want to welcome you to the C-Suite Cheat Code, a show where we pull the curtain back on the unwritten rules of corporate America and we give out the cheat codes to reconstructing the corporate ladder. First item on our meeting agenda, Wall Street has named the top 250 best run companies. Then we will head on over to my favorite place in the world, the internet, where I will share my favorite post from the week. After that, we'll have a conversation with the Chief Human Resource Officer at GCM Grosvenor, Sandy Hurse, and we'll talk about taking risks and building relationships. And then lastly, we'll head on over to the hot seat where I will answer your questions. Today, we are talking about cultivating relationship with sponsors and the revolving door. As you can see, we have so much to cover today, so let's get to it. In case you missed it, the Drucker and the Wall Street Journal released their annual list of the 250 best managed companies. And in their opinion, these are the companies that are doing business right. So how did they pick the companies? Well, they assessed them on 5 key areas. And those areas were customer satisfaction, employee engagement and development, which is huge in the I Choose the Ladder community, innovation, social responsibility, and financial strength. And based on how the companies that they assessed ranked in those 5 areas, they either made the list of the 250 best run companies or they did not make the cut. And so let me give you the top 5 that rose above all else. So number 5 was Intel. Number 4 was International Business Machines. Number 3 was Apple. Number 2 was Amazon.com. And then number 1 was Microsoft. I was shocked at Microsoft because when I think about the chatter or the communication around Microsoft, it's that they are an older company. Maybe they're not as attractive to younger employees. But from what we can see based on this assessment, they ranked and they rose above all else. And so why is that, right? And I was thinking through like my experience with Microsoft products, but just like the branding of Microsoft. And basically here's why they said Microsoft was number 1. So Microsoft ranked no lower than 6th in 4 of the 5 main components, and employee engagement and development, innovation, social responsibility, and financial strength. Like it was all of those marks were above a 6, right? And so that means that they're getting great feedback from their employees, they're getting great feedback from their customers and their clients. And because of that, they ranked number 1. So what does that mean for companies who are aspiring to be on this Management 250 list? It means that there are certain things within the walls of your organization that you need to be intentional about optimizing. For me, I look specifically at that employee engagement and development because that is the work that we do at I Choose the Ladder. And so if your employees are not singing your praises, if they're not feeling like they can see a future there, if they're not feeling like there's an environment where they can grow and learn, you're not going to actually earn a spot on this list just because it's so important in having a company that is well ran. And now we head to my favorite place in the world, the internet, to share one of my favorite posts of the week. And today is actually about what about the employees who stayed. So the Instagram post says, I've heard all about the money companies are throwing at new hires to attract them, but I haven't heard much about what companies are doing to retain the amazing talent that they already have. And so you know that if you are part of the I Choose the Ladder community, we talk a lot about the morale of the ones who stayed and how to show employees that they are appreciated for picking up the slack of the employees who actually left. And so if you are thinking about what to do for employee engagement and development, remember that the ones who stayed deserve to be celebrated just as much as the ones that you are bringing in. And now we are about to get to the segment of the show where you get gems. And so I hope you have your I Choose the Ladder notebook and your favorite pen. Today in our conversation, I am talking to Sandra Hurse, who is the Chief Human Resource Officer at GCM Grosvenor. She was a speaker at our past I Choose the Ladder, the Climb conference. And in this conversation with her, we talk about taking risks and building relationships, which are key things as you try to grow and develop professionally. So grab your notebook and get ready to get the gems. Hi, Sandy. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Watchin, I am so excited to be here and thank you so much for having me and looking forward to our discussion.
So first things first, you were at the Climb Career Summit. Everyone's obsessed with Sandy. People are like, can you give me her email address? I'm like, no, find her on LinkedIn or something. But the current industry that you work in isn't necessarily known for, having a lot of women who are in positions of leadership or having Black women. So for you, what was your first job into corporate? We'll understand like how you ended up in this industry, in this space, but like, do you remember like growing up, did you want to be in corporate America? Did your family stress having a certain type of job? Like, how does this happen?
Yeah. So look, my family did not stress a certain type of job. What they stressed was education. My parents were, my family is from the Caribbean. My parents left Jamaica, went to England where I was born, and made a very conscious decision to leave the UK and come to the US because of educational opportunities for their children. So for me in my life growing up, it wasn't about if you were going to college, it was when. It wasn't if you were going to get a master's degree, it was when. So all of that was kind of, just built up that way. And being an obedient middle child, I did exactly, what my parents expected and wanted me to do. And I think I was always very interested in numbers and math. In the beginning in my life, I thought I was going to go work at an insurance company and be an actuarial and kind of do all of the statistics work behind life insurance and that kind of thing. And I went off to college, went to Baruch College in New York, which, my family, we didn't know about Ivy Leagues and that kind of thing, and got a fine education and was just very, very much drawn to the markets, right? And drawn to finance and numbers. And so I started out in a role as a financial planning and analysis analyst, right? A business analyst, which was great because it rounded me and I supported and learned about all of the analysis that we did behind the businesses, of a credit card company at Citigroup. So much of it was less about knowing exactly what I wanted to do, but where I wanted to be.
And so we know now the importance of like mentorship and sponsorship. And for not a lot, but for people who have parents who may have a background in corporate, there's a little bit more of a built-in network, right, that you can access. Having come from a different background where I feel like your parents instilled the values in you that are necessary to be successful in corporate, how did you bridge that mentorship gap or find people, if you did, to help you figure out what this world on the other side looks like?
So a little bit of, in the beginning, stumbling my way through it, to be honest, right? Stumbling my way through it. And now I kind of define it as luck. And a lot of people know me as where luck is really where preparation and opportunity meet. Mm-hmm. And the one part of that I always controlled, and I think this is something that was built in me, is whatever I was doing, do it in an excellent way. Right. And so that, if people were building a team or I was talking to someone, I was able to effectively articulate what it is that I was doing and how I was doing it and talk about my contribution. So for lack of a better term, my elevator pitch, before it even became coined an elevator pitch, but understanding who I was, what I did, and what my contributions are or were in a given situation, and being able to talk about that both. And I listened to one of your other podcasts and someone talked about the importance of being able to communicate both verbally and in a written way, right? Mm-hmm. So being able to write, that is extremely important. So being able to do that and tell your story and tell what role you played in things. And I think once people hear that, they think about opportunities, kind of come about, and you have to be willing to take risk. And it wasn't always where, it was 2 steps forward. Sometimes it was a step to the side. I would say that, when I think about it, there are a lot of people who kind of hit their stride when they're in their 30s, early 40s, right? For me, it's a bit later, right? It's later on. And I think, quite frankly, that happens for a lot of women, right? And in particular, women of color, because the opportunities may not come pouring in the beginning. And sometimes, especially if you switch careers, right? I started out in finance and marketing, and I call myself the accidental HR person. And so, for me, but it was a great move for me, and it fed my soul as well, because I also got to help people who looked like me, and help to, for people who were interested, to sidestep some of the potholes that I stepped in,
Mm.
right, and really pay it forward in that way.
So as you think through like your career, right? We talked in the last podcast episode about the career story and people trying to figure out how they make the different pieces of their careers make sense. So as you think, like, what's the through line of your career? What's something that has always been consistent about you and the work that you do, regardless of the company or the industry that you've worked for? Because I think people are, with what's happening with the job market, people are starting to think about, how they can articulate and what actually matters when they talk about their career. So if you think through the through line of your career, like, what would you say that is?
I think it's two things: taking risks, right? It's not always going to become exactly the way that you think it's going to happen.
Mhm.
And with that, right, and I should say taking calculated risks, right? And that is smart, and being thoughtful about opportunities. And sometimes it may not fit exactly with what you think your next step is going to be. It may not even be something that's going to tap into, all of the skills, right, that you've built in your quiver, but someone's asking you to do this because there is a trust that you can do it, right? So sometimes it's jumping in and taking that risk. And with that, tied into that, it's about relationships, right? And building relationships. And I say, look, it's really, really, really important. I set aside time in my calendar every single week, no matter how busy I am, to make sure that I'm nurturing one or two relationships. And that can be as simple as I saw an article and I'm sending it to someone, or I'm reaching out to someone who I've met, and whether it's me coaching them coaching me. So it's up and down and sideways, but relationships are key. And I always say to people, how you leave a job or an opportunity, how you tie things out, is really, really important, because you have one reputation, and that is in.
So one of the things that we talked about, that you talked about, is like adding value, right? So when you're nurturing those relationships, you're finding something that is valuable to the person that you are talking to, or that you are trying to nurture or build a relationship with. I think we've seen that, when it comes to mentorship and sponsorship, it's challenging for some Black women, right? We tend to mentor people and sponsor people who look like us. And so as people, as Black women, are thinking about how to build those relationships, like, any best practices, any words of advice that you could give to someone who feels like they need that to get to the next level, but don't necessarily know how to go about cultivating those relationships?
Yeah, and look, I'm a realist on this, right? There's elements that you absolutely can control, right? Because what I don't want people to feel like, if I'm not finding mentorship or I'm not finding sponsorship, that it's all about you and you're doing something wrong, because that's not the case. Sometimes, like I said, it's just time and space. So I will start there, but you want to find it and you want to position yourself in the best way to get it. So to me, some of this is really understanding value creation in the organization that you're in. How is value created? And then how do you think about how you can help to augment that value? And sometimes that might be in your current line, just making sure what you're doing is absolutely excellent and that you're adding value there. But outside of that, it may be raising your hand for special projects, right? Which is more work, but it's raising your hand or having a point of view and perspective on something and thinking that through. And that's really, really important, because sometimes it could be your boss. Usually a sponsor is your boss's boss or your boss's boss, right? A couple of levels above you, because what you want those people to know you, right? So that they can, and know your work and the value that you add, so that they can talk about you in those rooms that you're not in.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not, it's not easy to do. It's not easy to happen when you aren't, when you are in the majority the way that we are. And you have to think about how you build those relationships. And I would say the way to do that is raising your hand for that extra assignment, right? And sometimes it comes down to, this isn't the place right now. You could be doing a great job, and you have to think about those moments, right? Of pivoting, and those moments of when you need to say, okay, I need to do this differently. And I'm going to pause and tell a quick story here, where I was in a role and at a company that I loved my role, right? And I loved what I was doing. I got a lot of great feedback on the work that I was doing. But I knew in the back of my mind, number one, I wanted to be a head of HR somewhere. And more importantly, I also wanted to be a managing director. And I felt like I paid my dues and I, put enough in, and that should be recognized. Well, I found out through my relationships that I wasn't going to be supported that year. And wasn't anything about the work that I was doing or that I could have done this differently or that differently. The person who was making that decision made another choice. And I was okay with that. I was sort of like a little devastated. Maybe I wasn't okay, but I got my head wrapped around it. And I said, okay, I can sit here and wait for the next cycle. But then I thought to myself, you know what? I would not be happy about it. And I probably would figure out some self-sabotage here in some way, because I'd just be unhappy or angry about it. Mm-hmm. And what I did was then leverage my network, and I found a different path. And the thing for me, or the measurement for me, was that, when it all washed out 5 or 6 years later, the person that was supported by the organization moved to a head of HR job within months after I had moved into a head of HR job. Right. So the point was, I took a different path, and it was a difficult one, but sometimes you have to take that risk and really sometimes know when it's time to move on.
Got it. And on that note, Sandy, thank you so much for doing this. I am blown away always when I speak to you, because you have so much wisdom. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. And I appreciate all the work that you're doing to help the community of Black women who are out there striving to be their best selves.
And now we are heading on over to the hot seat, where I get to answer your questions. This employee question says, how do I find and cultivate relationships with a potential sponsor? So this is a great question, and it comes up frequently because we hear a lot about how to get a mentor, but we don't necessarily always talk about sponsorship, which in my opinion is more important than actually your mentoring relationship. And so here's the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. A mentor is someone who has wisdom, is invested in your career, is invested in your success, is someone who's older typically, but you could have tons of mentors for different things. They don't have to work within the walls of your organization. A sponsor, on the other hand, is someone who works within the walls of your company. They have the wisdom, they have the access, and they have the financial capital, and they're willing to leverage it on your behalf. So they throw your hat in the ring for positions. They help you plan how to navigate your current organization. And unfortunately for sponsorship, you don't typically find a sponsor unless they are assigned by your organization. Typically, your sponsor finds you. So how can you get connected with the sponsor? One, you have to be highly visible, right? So the work that you do, you need to make sure that the right people, based on what your career objectives are, know about the work that you're doing and the impact that you're having. Second, you need to build relationships with people at all levels of the organization and share with them what your career goals are. And then lastly, once you've identified someone who you think is interested in you, has power, would be able to work with you to get to that next level, I would say then you put some time on their calendar and you have a conversation about them potentially being your sponsor. But it's a little bit more of a process than a mentoring relationship, just because the ask and the understanding of a sponsoring relationship is that they will be leveraging their power, their influence, and their relationships on your behalf. And so it's a really big ask, and you want to make sure that you're approaching it the right way. In today's manager question, it says, my team is like a revolving door. Almost twice a year, someone leaves. I check in with my members of my team who say I'm a great manager, but they hate how the company is managed. The lower level employees don't get treated well or paid well. I personally get treated well as a manager and try to advocate for them as best as I can. But at this point, my manager is beginning to get annoyed with me, and it's having a negative effect on my career and my promotions. What can I do? This is a really great question because it gets to the facts of how managers can prioritize their employees while also managing their career and their success. And so one, I would say I applaud you for going to bat for your employees, right? But what I would say is you need to be upfront with the people you manage about how the company runs and the politics that they may need to navigate in order to get promoted, get made, get more money, or get whatever career objective that they're trying to meet met. And then that gives them the opportunity to make an informed decision on if they feel like the company is the right place for them in their development, right? And I know that sounds kind of weird because you want to retain your good people. You want to make sure that, you don't have people leaving all the time, but you also don't want a department full of employees who are bitter or who are angry because you're not going to get the best work out of them. And so in this instance, I would say transparency both with the people you manage, but also with your manager around the spot that you're currently in, and maybe have some thought partnership work on what you can do to help navigate that situation. But you are completely right. It is a very, 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 very tough situation to be in, but I think transparency and conversation is the best way to deal with that. All right, guys, so that is the episode for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to check it out. But really quickly before I head out, you all know that I love to leave you with a career affirmation from the I Choose a Ladder career affirmation box. If you do not have yours already, make sure you head on over to choosealadder.com to get your deck of affirmation cards. Let's see what the message is for today. I release everything that doesn't serve me. I release everything that doesn't serve me. You all know that I love to keep the conversation going, so make sure that you connect with me on Instagram at I See You Watching. And if you want to connect for more career advice, make sure you check out the company at I Choose a Ladder on Instagram. And until next time, thank you for watching. Meeting adjourned.